You didn't come this far just to play small in someone else's game. You're not here to react. You're here to rewrite the rules. What they called passive, what they called silence, was actually strategy. Divine strategy. You're not average. You're not here to prove your worth through conflict. You are the proof. The fact that you're still standing, still glowing, still growing, that's your testimony. While they were playing tug-of-war for control, you were rising, unshaken, untouched, unstoppable. And that wasn't luck. That was alignment. That was you stepping into who you've always been. This is your sign. You didn't miss the moment. You are the moment. Without lifting a finger or raising a voice, an unspoken boundary emerged that no amount of noise could penetrate. In the stillness, the loudest truths revealed themselves, not with spectacle, but with absence. The hunger for validation bounced back unanswered, leaving behind only echoes that mocked the ones who uttered them. No response became its own kind of shield, not forged from steel, but from self-possession, untouchable, weightless, and unmoved. Insults and provocations collided with this invisible wall, dissipating like ink in water. What seemed like silence was in fact precision. Every non-reaction was a note in an unwritten symphony of restraint that disarmed without confrontation. In that quiet refusal to engage, a revelation unfolded. They held no power here. Their urgency, their outrage, their need to matter dissolved when it became clear they were no longer part of the emotional circuitry they sought to short-circuit. Their importance was imagined, never real. Balance found its own way, not through revenge or rage, but through quiet severance. They poured energy into a connection that had already evaporated, mistaking a closed door for an open window. While they grasped for significance, they unknowingly leaked their intentions into the open, revealing more with every failed attempt at control. Every plot meant to ensnare only served to spotlight their inner fractures. Where they expected resistance, they met only vacancy. Their projections landed nowhere. Their manipulations hung suspended in mid-air, useless without participation. The mask they wore slipped, not because it was pulled off, but because no one looked at it long enough to make it stick. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Each boundary test turned into a self-revealing monologue. In trying to expose weakness, they uncovered their own. In reaching to diminish, they only made the gap wider. In becoming irrelevant, they taught the most valuable lesson of all: what it means to no longer give a single piece of yourself to what seeks to diminish it. What was once a silent target became a silent observer, watching every effort to breach emotional space dissolve before it reached its mark. The ones who sought to siphon clarity and peace found themselves drained, not by conflict, but by the absence of it. In trying to twist the direction of energy, they became tangled in their own internal dissonance, slowly burning through their resources while receiving nothing in return. Boundaries ceased to be reactive measures and transformed into steady currents of inner alignment. Not built from bitterness, nor carved from defiance, they existed as quiet certainties, expressions of deep-rooted understanding, rather than impulsive barricades. That calm recalibration destabilized those who thrived on imbalance, sending tremors through their unspoken assumptions. Detachment from performance expectations severed the unconscious leash they had attached, no longer needing to narrate every decision or offer clarity where none was owed. The illusion of entitlement cracked. The entitlement had lived unnoticed, woven into routines of assumed access, until a refusal illuminated the space it once occupied. Each escalating response unveiled a hidden script, one not grounded in reciprocity, but in dependency masked as affection. It became evident that the connection had never been designed to elevate both sides. It was a transaction, one-sided, veiled in sentiment, structured to extract rather than exchange. Sovereignty became the neutralizer. Without drama, without spectacle, the smallest acts of self-prioritization disrupted the mechanisms of control. A simple refusal, unembellished and final, became more potent than any confrontation. In those quiet moments of choosing peace over explanation, power shifted entirely. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. Those who clung to influence resorted to emotional sleight of hand, hoping to provoke a return to the old dynamic. Their tactics betrayed their intent. Their accusations and demands were mirrors. They revealed not flaws in the one who walked away, but distortions in those who refused to let go. Refusing to engage became a turning point. Instead of feeding cycles designed to scatter focus, energy was redirected into purpose. Every instance of chaos repelled became a building block. Where they laid obstacles, a deeper concentration formed. What once distracted now sharpened. Their attempts to fragment attention had an unexpected effect: refinement. Rather than unravel under the pressure, direction intensified. Internal momentum replaced reactionary spirals. While others remained tangled in repetition, transformation occurred quietly, alchemizing disruption into resolve and interference into progress. Achievement became the silent detonation they never anticipated, each step forward a quiet rebellion against their predictions. What was meant to stifle became the catalyst for movement, and in their attempts to anchor progress, they unwittingly provided the friction that launched it. Their aim was disorientation. What emerged instead was clarity, structure, and direction. While temporary games unfolded in the shadows, designed with urgency and fueled by limited thinking, another momentum gathered beyond their reach. They relied on tactics crafted for short-term gain, unaware that they were contending with a rhythm not governed by time, but by purpose. What they called control had an expiration date. What emerged in its place was immune to decay. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. What confused them most was the serenity. Not a mask, not a performance, just a state that asked for nothing and owed even less. That stillness, detached from praise or attention, disrupted every attempt to provoke. They could not measure or decode what wasn't built to impress. They tracked updates like codebreakers searching for secrets, treating each sign of peace as if it contained a riddle to solve. They misread contentment as concealment, unaware that no disguise was being worn. Their scrutiny revealed only their need, not any hidden flaw in the target of their focus. Alignment wasn't an accident. It came through friction, yes, but also through readiness. There was no randomness to the intersections. What led to this moment was a chain reaction of choices that could not be orchestrated externally. This path couldn't be hijacked, and attempts to derail it only clarified its inevitability. Movements toward empowerment don't require permission. Those who operate from control resist collective awakening, fearing the autonomy it unlocks. But resistance only makes the truth louder. No system can restrain a will already in motion. No pay-to-enter doctrine. No manipulation wrapped in mysticism. True guidance arrives without demand. Dialogue flows freely when not restricted by profit. The door that opens without pressure holds more weight than the one forced open. Some looked for signs of dependence that never arrived. Some waited for collapse where resilience bloomed. In the absence of their influence, life did not pause. It expanded. It grew. And that was the revelation that unsettled them most. How little their validation mattered in the architecture of a reality no longer built to include them. Inner balance disrupted their illusion of control in ways they never prepared for. Power slipped from their grasp the moment emotional influence lost its effect. They had measured their importance by how much they could shape another's reactions, but your grounded joy became the silence that neutralized their entire approach. While they dissected your every move like a code they couldn't crack, you were immersed in a rhythm of living too whole to be shaken by their unrest. Your peace interrupted a belief system rooted in contradiction. They had been taught to associate reward with constant turmoil, to believe that dignity required suffering, and that self-worth must be earned through struggle. But your way of being contradicted their inner script. It revealed a simpler truth, that alignment was available all along, not through conquest, but by walking away from inherited distortion. When your growth expanded into unfamiliar territory, they didn't respond with curiosity, but with projection. They tried to pin their limits to your vision, assuming no one could escape the walls they never questioned. Your progress became threatening, not because it harmed them, but because it proved their cage wasn't locked. When your heart is full of God's love, it's a sign to give. By tapping the super thank you button and offering $100 or more, you become a vessel of His grace. Your generosity can change lives, reaching hearts you may never meet. You have a divine purpose, and this act of faith carries His light forward. Give now, and may His blessings surround you always. Doubt became their language of choice. They presented opinions as prophecy, not from insight, but from fear. They questioned your goals with voices that carried the weight of their own unattempted dreams. Advice came, dressed in familiarity, but behind it was a hidden demand. Stay within reach. Don't outgrow the version of reality where they still feel powerful. Concern became a costume for insecurity. Their mission wasn't to protect you. It was to avoid the sting of seeing someone refuse to settle. You reaching for more forced them to confront how much they had stopped reaching. The reminders of your failures weren't about your missteps. They were about keeping the spotlight away from their own resignation. Each idea you birthed that defied their structure lit up the contrast between resignation and possibility. Each vision you claimed was a mirror, reflecting the choices they refused to make. As your path stretched beyond the edges of their comfort, they clung harder to the familiar, hoping your momentum might still be interrupted. But fear casts the longest shadow when courage walks into the room. Your evolution became the measurement of what they could have pursued, but didn't. Each boundary you enforced, each silence you offered instead of justification, left behind echoes in the spaces where they used to be able to reach you. And in the moments when you stopped narrating your inner process, when your victories no longer came with explanations, something in their atmosphere collapsed. Not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that felt like being locked out of a world they thought they controlled. What they interpreted as withdrawal was in fact preservation, an intentional act of safeguarding internal clarity from those who had handled past access carelessly. Over time, they had grown entitled to updates they never earned. Familiarity with your journey gave them a false sense of power, allowing them to interject opinions, forecast failure, or inflate their role in a life they never helped build. When that window closed, unease began to grow in their unspoken spaces. Without their usual entry points, their need for relevance turned frantic. Suddenly, every quiet moment became a source of imagined chaos. They speculated wildly, patching together rumors and assumptions, not to understand, but to regain the illusion of knowing. Not being able to monitor your movement disturbed something deep within their illusion of control. In this silence, a threshold was crossed. Space was no longer just absence, it became a filter. What slipped through was authentic. What could not survive it was noise in disguise. Those who honored the new distance adapted. Those who pushed against it exposed their intentions. What they misread as ignorance was actually discernment in stillness. The tactics they deployed came with a misplaced confidence, rooted in the assumption that they were still steps ahead. But while they spoke in half-hidden jabs and coded critiques, you had already mapped their tendencies, quietly noting every behavioral glitch like a code breaker gathering patterns. They mistook your patience for passivity, not knowing every interaction was being archived in your awareness with surgical precision. Their performances, once cloaked in charm or concern, began to lose effect. You read between their pauses, decoded the weight behind their smiles. While they believed themselves to be elusive, their predictability unfolded like a looped script. They thought their words were cloaked in complexity. They didn't realize they were walking through transparent fog. You often knew what they'd say before they spoke it, what moves they'd attempt before they even acted. There was no mysticism in this, just a refined understanding of motive born from long observation. Their efforts to destabilize were seen and neutralized before they even gathered momentum. You weren't reacting. You were years ahead in detachment. While they operated within a framework of reaction and performance, you navigated with quiet clarity. They assumed your stillness was indecision, not strategy. What they thought was a game of dominance was something you had already outgrown. They were chasing answers in a maze you no longer lived inside. True intelligence revealed itself not in winning small confrontations, but in rising beyond them. You stopped showing up to roles you'd outlived. Your peace became a contrast too sharp for them to ignore. Every moment you refused to shrink back into their design, you became a living contrast to the places they had chosen to remain. And that, more than anything, unraveled their illusion of superiority. They watched someone navigate terrain they had once claimed was impassable. Every excuse they leaned on was quietly dismantled by your consistency. Time, adversity, and limitation, realities you both faced, became the very tools you used to ascend. And as your milestones multiplied, their stagnation began to echo louder in the chambers of their denial. The contrast wasn't spoken. It simply existed. They kept track of your elevation with an intensity they never applied to their own progress. While their hours dissolved into the same circular dialogues, you were refining direction. While they justified inertia, you transformed effort into ignition. Their attempts to dilute your focus only pushed you deeper into your own clarity. While they rehearsed judgment, you rehearsed resilience. What you were building wasn't just evolution, it was sacred reconstruction. You didn't just adapt, you redefined. Each closed door became a blueprint. Each failure became architecture. They saw the outward results, but what disrupted them most was the inner reconstruction they couldn't comprehend, because what they failed to activate, you alchemized. It wasn't your intention to expose their inertia. But truth doesn't ask permission to be witnessed. Your steady elevation turned their comfort zones into mirrors they couldn't look away from. Every layer you shed made their attachment to stagnation more obvious. Your shift revealed what they'd long avoided. That staying the same is not protection, it's a choice. The most profound shift came when you no longer flinched at their provocations. Their strategies for retaliation lost their bite because you had already stepped out of reach. They still saw war, but you had already stepped into stillness. While they mapped out ways to regain control, your silence became a thunder they couldn't silence. And that silence wasn't manufactured. It arose from the kind of internal balance no external reaction could destabilize. What used to trigger emotional reactions now barely moved the needle. Your sense of wholeness had grown past their influence. You were no longer adjusting to fit their expectations. They were adjusting to your absence. They rehearsed comebacks while you were laying foundations. They tried to lure you back into battles long irrelevant, unaware that you had stopped playing those roles. Your peace wasn't an escape, it was a declaration. And in that stillness, you began building a future they couldn't sabotage because they were no longer part of its framework. The most unforgiving truth wasn't your refusal to fight. It was your indifference to the battlefield. They felt this. It stung deeper than opposition. Because your calm didn't signal defeat. It proved that they had never been the opponent. The war was within themselves. And while they clung to resentment, you became the example of what freedom could look like. And freedom isn't loud. It's unmistakable. It's the presence that needs no defense, the light that doesn't dim to be polite. You became unreachable, not because you moved away, but because you rose into a frequency where their friction simply couldn't follow. Progress wasn't just personal. It became a declaration stitched into reality itself, forcing those who doubted to observe what could no longer be denied. As they stood motionless, looped inside the echoes of old patterns, your growth unfolded in plain sight. What they once dismissed became the very thing everyone else began to admire. With every visible step forward, their avoidance of transformation was lit in unflattering clarity. Each reference to your rise unsettled them, not because it harmed them, but because it removed their last excuse. You had taken the same raw material life gave them and built something undeniable. They used conflict as currency. You moved beyond transactions altogether. Their games became irrelevant once you chose to walk a different path, one that didn't require domination to declare power. While they exhausted themselves trying to deconstruct what they didn't understand, you refined yourself. They mistook your silence for weakness, your distance for arrogance. Meanwhile, you invested in becoming. What they called detachment was discipline. They celebrated false pauses while you orchestrated actual turning points. Winning was never the goal. Transcending their entire framework was. You outgrew the dynamic entirely. They couldn't control, confuse, or compare anymore. You had become someone immune to their reach, not by defense, but by direction. Every attempt they made to drag you back down only served as confirmation that your elevation wasn't imaginary, it was irreversible. While they reloaded old tactics, you stepped into new dimensions. They unknowingly shaped your resolve. The pressure they applied became your design lab. Their resistance was the chisel that revealed your form. You didn't overpower them. You became impossible to match. You demonstrated that presence, clarity, and conviction need no announcement. The work spoke, the rhythm shifted, and you became your own compass. The truth is, they never really opposed you. They were reacting to the version of themselves they abandoned. Your climb disturbed their slumber. And that friction, it was never about you. It was about what you represented. Proof that growth was always an option. Their interference turned into training. The more they tried to stall you, the more adaptive you became. The more limits they tried to place on your direction, the more inventive your routes became. Their strategies unintentionally fast-tracked your breakthrough. The victory was never against them. It was a crossing into territory they didn't believe existed. When your heart is full of God's love, it's a sign to give. By tapping the super thank you button and offering $100 or more, you become a vessel of His grace. Your generosity can change lives, reaching hearts you may never meet. You have a divine purpose, and this act of faith carries His light forward. Give now, and may His blessings surround you always. You now exist in a frequency where their noise is just background static. Their drama doesn't disturb. It fades. What looked like luck from the outside was really alignment responding to clarity. What seemed random was the natural result of inner certainty echoing into your surroundings. Every attempt to shrink your light only sharpened your edges. Their doubt was the spark that shaped your discernment. And no, your moves weren't calculated. They were guided. Strategy implies effort. What you embodied was flow, driven by something far deeper than foresight. Patience shaped you into someone they could never anticipate. While they rushed toward quick validation, you moved in rhythm with a deeper unfolding. Their urgency was loud. Yours was strategic. Where they tried to force outcomes, you listened for timing. Their arena became your proving ground, not by choice, but by necessity. Every tactic they thought would shake you only carved more clarity into your path. Attempts to slow you down only intensified your focus. Their interference was absorbed, processed, and turned into momentum. They played for moments. You built toward legacies. They moved by impulse. You moved by alignment. What they labeled as silence was calibration. And by the time they noticed the difference, your rise was already beyond their comprehension. Your evolution became the answer to questions they never dared to ask. It wasn't domination that defined your ascent, but detachment. You didn't need to win in their way. You became the kind of presence that doesn't bend to noise. While they competed for recognition, you transformed presence into purpose. This wasn't a contest. This was emergence. You crossed thresholds they didn't believe were real, not through force, but through frequency. You reached a point where no resistance could tether you, no conflict could define you. The air changed around you. Your very being began to shift the spaces you entered. Victory wasn't something you chased, it was something you embodied. Not because you conquered someone else, but because you stopped needing anything outside yourself to confirm your value. They wanted a reaction. You became stillness. They wanted a war. You built sanctuary. They looked for proof in applause. You found it in peace. This is the moment where you no longer need to explain, no longer need to match energy that never deserved your attention. The distance between your trajectory and their intentions speaks for itself. This is what happens when clarity becomes your compass. This is what happens when growth becomes your only response. The path ahead belongs to those who no longer waste time proving they've changed because they've become the evidence, who no longer explain their choices because their existence is the explanation. This isn't an ending. It's the unveiling of everything they tried to delay but could never prevent.